Once upon a time, in a small Kansas town, there was a girl by the name of Shawnee Jenkins. Shawnee was 8, and like most 8-year-olds, went to school, hated homework, and loved nothing more than a root beer float from the corner store. With 2 eyes, 2 arms, and 2 legs she got tangled in her jump rope all the time, she looked like most 8-year-olds too. In fact, nothing about Shawnee stood out at all, except that she lived on a haunted farm. Oh, the Jenkins farm wasn't really haunted, but it was certainly the kind of place your mother told you not to play around. Something about it just wasn't right. Of course, there was no electricity, no running water, no sign of life whatsoever but plenty of cobwebs, and all around it for acres lay the dried-up remains of a long-dead wheat field. There were rumors of screaming coming from the property at night, but most folks just laughed those off as tall tales told by little kids. Shawnee didn't have any friends, but that was fine by her. She had her parents to look after. What happened to them happened so long ago that she barely remembered what it was exactly. She just remembered Mama waking her up one night and carrying her down to the cellar where she left her and told her to keep quiet. She remembered that Mama sounded scared, and it scared her too. Then there were those awful sounds going on up above, Mama and Daddy yelling, and some things that were most certainly not Mama and Daddy. She didn't remember much else, really, just that everything was different after that. Mama stopped getting up in the morning to make eggs and biscuits. Daddy didn't go out to check on the crops. They slept all day and only got up at night. Often they disappeared for hours at a time and came back just before dawn, their mouths all stained red and dripping. They said they were hungry was all, and that she'd understand one day. But little by little they talked less and less. Their teeth got long and sharp, their eyes big and black. And it was when Mama stopped singing her to sleep at night that Shawnee knew they weren't ever going to get better. That was years ago. Now they didn't talk at all. They just hissed like angry possums and kept to the shadows. It was like they weren't even people anymore, just animals in Mama and Daddy's skin. But they were still her parents, even if they smelled like rotten meat. So Shawnee went about her days as normally as an 8-year-old can. She went to school, did her homework, brought home her progress reports all decorated with foil stars and smiley faces, even though Daddy didn't seem to understand what they were anymore. Shawnee earned a little money from her paper route, and when she had a little left over after the groceries, she'd treat herself to a root beer float. Mr. Johnson would tell her to say hey to her folks for him, and she would, even though they just blinked at her and crawled up the walls. There were days it was harder to pretend, though. It just hurt. When Shawnee saw the other children with their parents in the park or at school, it hurt so much she thought her heart would stop. It was those times she'd lie down on the cold concrete slab over Mama's sleeping hole and imagine Mama was holding her and singing her favorite song, the one about the mockingbird. And she'd feel better. Then she'd get back up, clean up the blood her parents left behind the night before, and hope she'd fall asleep before they went out for their dinner. It wasn't fair that she had to live this way, but nobody said this was a fair story. Some boys from the next town over had heard about the haunted Jenkins farm, and after they got all liquored up and wild, they rode over on their bikes that roared like mountain lions, and they made up their minds to torch the place. After they tore it up, that is. They had to show each other and their girlfriends they weren't scared of nothing. Shawnee, having heard them pull up, ran to the cellar and hid, heart pounding wildly as the boys kicked over furniture and punched holes in the walls above her. "This place ain't haunted," one complained. "It's just a bunch of old junk." "Well, what about the cellar, Jimmy?" said another. "We ain't checked down there yet." Shawnee's heart pounded even harder, but not for her own sake, for her parents, who were still asleep under their slabs just beneath her feet. They wouldn't be up for a little while yet. Until midnight they were as still and helpless as baby rats. She quickly looked around in the shadows for a weapon until her eyes made out the shape of Daddy's pickaxe. The boys were on the cellar stairs now. Shawnee grabbed the pickaxe and told herself she was brave, the bravest 8-year-old ever. Nobody was going to hurt Mama and Daddy as long as she was there. And now the intruders were there. "Well, look what we have here," said one of the boys. "Get out of my house," Shawnee hissed. "Or what?" said the one called Jimmy. "You gonna swing your pickaxe around and break my little toe?" They all howled with laughter, but Shawnee grabbed the pickaxe tighter. "Get out of my house or you're dead," she threatened, but they didn't want to listen. So she swung that pick around with all her might. It was much too heavy, but she managed to graze one of the boys enough to knock out a tooth. He screamed in pain and cursed up a storm, but before she could hit him again, he ran forward and grabbed her, lifted her up over his head, and threw her hard against the wall. She was still seeing stars when he came after her again. "Stop it, Jimmy, just stop it," one of the girlfriends cried. "Yeah, Jimmy, come on," said a boy. "She's just a kid. Now let's beat it before we get caught." This time the one called Jimmy listened. He spat a broken tooth to the ground and swore under his breath and walked off with the others, leaving Shawnee in a crumpled heap. But they never had a chance. There was a snarling sound from beneath the dirt floor, and as suddenly as if dynamite had exploded, the concrete slabs shattered. The intruders tried to run, but the creatures that came up from the depths were faster. They sprung to the ceiling and dropped down on the boys and their girlfriends, tearing them to pieces with their claws and their big pointy teeth. By the time it was over, there was blood and bone and skin flung all over the place. As Shawnee struggled to breathe through the pain in her lungs, all she could think was, "How am I going to clean all this up before school tomorrow?" But now it was getting hard to see. The edges of things were black and fuzzy. The pain was going away, but she couldn't feel her fingers anymore. She tasted blood in her mouth. Mama and Daddy crept over to her and stood there watching for a while. They stayed like that for hours, not saying a word, not making a move. They didn't even touch the bodies they'd ripped apart so savagely. Shawnee guessed they just weren't hungry this time, but she didn't mind. Everything was getting blurry now, and it was nice just to feel them with her. Somewhere in her head, she heard Mama singing the Mockingbird Song. Shawnee smiled weakly and let the calm wash over her. She thought maybe Mama kissed her goodnight, but she couldn't be sure. Eventually, her parents left her side. It was morning now, and Shawnee was afraid for a moment. But something inside her told her it was going to be all right. She faintly saw Mama and Daddy's dark shapes disappear as they ascended the cellar stairs and walked out of the house into the daylight. That was the last thing Shawnee Jenkins saw, the last thing she knew.